It's that time of the year where you're itching to play some Spooktober style games. The GameCube actually had quite a selection of games that deem appropriate for the holiday. Last year, I reviewed 5 games during the month of October that were games I felt fit the bill, which will get a mention during the video's outro. Since I've already provided in-depth reviews for those games, they will not be featured again in this video. Also, none of the Resident Evil games will be on today's list, as I still plan on doing a Resident Evil focused episode, and I would need a lot more time to dive into those to do it properly. Instead, today's list will comprise of lesser discussed games that fit the bill that you may or may not have heard of. So, with all that being said, let's check out some GameCube games fitting for the Halloween season. First up is Dragon's Lair 3D Return to the Lair, published by Encore and developed by Dragonstone Software. Released on both the Xbox and GameCube in late 2002, Dragon's Lair 3D is a reimagining of the original Dragon's Lair game, now as a 3D action platformer. Controlling Dirk the Daring, you must explore this treacherous castle filled with deviant creatures and countless traps, all while trying to save Princess Daphne. Dirk can wield his sword to take out enemies, as well as other resources acquired throughout his quest. Controls handle fairly well, but takes a little bit of time to acclimate to the platforming. Combat is okay, but I do wish it had a little bit more impact to the hits and the collision itself. While nowhere near as challenging as the QuickTime Event animated original arcade game, the game still retains a challenge with a variety of traps killing you constantly, as well as platforming that requires proper timing. I do love the game's visual style. It utilizes great cel shading that makes the game feel authentic to the original while transitioning the whole game into the 3D space. I was actually really hooked into this game and glad to see that something else was done with Dragon's Lair's property here. Next up is Alien Hominid, published by O3 Entertainment and developed by The Behemoth. Before Castle Crashers, the Behemoth's most successful game to date, this developer created a flash game called Alien Hominid on an awesome website called Newgrounds back in the day. Oh, how awesome the internet was back then. Anyway, Alien Hominid is a home console installment of the flash game from Newgrounds.com. This 2D run-and gun has you play as Alien Hominid as you crash land onto the Earth and get surrounded by the FBI, as well as other agencies throughout the game. With help from the Fat Kid, God, I miss early to mid-2000s humor not giving a damn about offending people, you must blast your way and even slice your way to find a way off planet Earth. This plays very much like an old-school Contra, with a single hit making you lose a life. It's a very challenging game, but you can even tackle it in co-op for twice the intense fun. The game does have some nice variety incorporated, like flying your UFO over here, as well as PDA games which are pretty fun. Back in the day, this was a game I thought was some budget shovelware for the console since I had never heard of O3 Entertainment as a publisher before. But man, I really missed out on a banger title back then, not realizing how awesome this game is. Next up is Buffy the Vampire Slayer Chaos Bleeds, published by Vivendi Universal and developed by Eurocom. A TV show that was quite popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, this installment of Buffy is actually the second release for the 6th generation of consoles, with the first installment actually being an Xbox exclusive developed by The Collective. Eurocom tackled this next installment, which takes place during the show's 5th season. This action-adventure has you playing a variety of the cast as you try to stop the villains from the show's past from sending the world into darkness. Controlling all different characters, you will have a wide variety of combat mechanics at your disposal. Melee combat is handled with both weak and strong attack buttons, with combos that can be pulled off by mixing the buttons up. Buffy, Xander, and Spike, for example, can use their fists and weapons picked up, while Willow can conjure up spells. The combat feels satisfying, and naturally, finishing off enemies wouldn't be Buffy without the wooden stake in use. It feels really badass knocking a vampire into the air and then staking them to their death. Exploration plays a big part of the game as well, trying to solve environmental puzzles to find your way through areas. I do also really like that the original cast is all here to reprise their roles. Overall, this one's a game that I feel many don't even know exists on the GameCube. I'll have to do a more in-depth review on this one in the near future.
You are so dusty. And that's all she wrote.
Ah, you must be one of the good guys.
Next up is Casper Spirit Dimensions, published by TDK Media Active and developed by Lucky Chicken Games. Now, Casper used to be a fairly recognizable media icon back in the day, and I was intrigued by the fact that he received the game at the time where his popularity was waning a bit. In this original storyline, Casper has to stop the evil ghost Kabosh, and with the help of Wendy, can visit other dimensions to try to defeat him. This 3D action-adventure game has you flying through levels, collecting gems, and completing objectives to help you advance through the story. Flying actually feels pretty solid, but locking onto enemies while moving and aiming definitely feels off. Casper can fire off projectiles at enemies and switch between standard blasts, ice blasts that can freeze enemies, and fire blasts that can cause explosions. Casper can even do a speed dash and ram open walls and take down enemies. From what I've played of this so far, I will say this plays far better than Lucky Chicken's other effort, which was Aquaman surprisingly, but in all honesty, this is actually a solid experience, and despite its control issues when locking on, it's still a pretty fun time. Who would have thought that Casper would have a pretty solid game? Next up is Disney's The Haunted Mansion, published by TDK Media Active and developed by High Voltage Software. The Haunted Mansion may have been a film that released a month after this game released, but the game is actually based off the ride itself, which may be for the best. You take control of Zeke, a 19th century author who gets fooled into caretaking a mansion that's, well, not quite as it seems. Zeke is guided by Madame Leota, who aids him in how to free the mansion from the horrors that await. He is provided a lantern called the Beacon of Souls and can fire projectiles to fend off against ghosts and other undead creatures. Each room you explore has you trying to activate the lights again in that room, and then check objects to scare out the souls that are hiding for you to catch with the Beacon of Souls. You will explore the mansion and try to collect all the souls, as you will need a certain amount to advance to each area. There's a nice blend of action and platforming here, and the controls are very responsive. There's also some neat gameplay ideas, like this sequence where you're shrunk onto a billiards table and need to lure the ghost playing pool to sink all the balls into the pockets. I will say, this is definitely one of those hidden gems I wish I discovered sooner. Next up is The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, published by Midway and developed by A2M. Based on the Cartoon Network series of the same name, this game has the characters and their voice cast return for a 3D arena brawler akin to Capcom's Power Stone. You will choose a character of your choice, with many to unlock as you play, and face off against opponents in living multi-tiered stages. Each character on stage has about 3 lives, and when you've depleted all their health and lives, you will be prompted a QuickTime event to finish them off from the match for good. Should you fail the QuickTime event though, then the opponent gets another chance at fighting you in the arena. There are numerous weapons you can pick up and utilize against opponents, whether melee-based or projectile-based. I really like that the stages keep changing up mid-fight, and while this does remind me of TMNT Mutant Melee, I will say that this is a much better attempt at this style game. The visual presentation does a good job of looking like the cartoon, and the voice acting definitely lends to the authenticity. While I've never watched this show before, I can see this being a game fans would have enjoyed back in the day. Again, I do wish that at least TMNT Mutant Melee would have been executed a little bit closer to how this one was.
Damn badly.
Next up is Monster House, published by THQ and developed by A2M. Based on the 2006 animated movie, Monster House has you playing as DJ, Jenny, and Chowder as they investigate the Nebbercracker's house in the neighborhood, which was known to scare kids away and steal their belongings in the process. In this third-person action adventure, you will explore the house and its horrors, as the living house will do anything and everything to stop you. Close off doorways with pipes, bring objects to life that attack you, and separate your friends all in the process. I will say, Monster House is a game I did not expect to be anywhere near as engrossing as it is. It plays like a younger audience's Resident Evil in some ways, where you can walk around the mansion in an almost over-the-shoulder camera and use your super soakers to deal with the living creatures. While exploring, you will have to find keys to let you access other parts of the house. Sometimes you will have to also watch out for these spotlights coming from the windows, which alerts the house of your exact location and summons enemies your way. The only gripe I had is that there's no way to really run and you can only walk, but it also kind of makes sense with the game's design. What's really neat is you can find arcade tokens to play Thou Art Dead, which is an old school arcade game within the game itself that's basically an homage to Castlevania. This was actually the closest that we got to a Castlevania on the GameCube, unfortunately, but that's a topic for another time. Overall, the time I spent with Monster House was a surprisingly positive one, and one that is definitely worth checking out.
I feel 14 years old.
Next up is Dr. Mudo, published and developed by Midway. So here is a platformer that I will admit I always saw on the shelves and never had an interest in trying back in the day. Well, all these years later, and I have to say, I shouldn't have judged the game by its cover. Dr. Mudo is an action platformer where you control, well, Dr. Mudo, as he accidentally destroys his planet. However, his lab and himself remain intact. You will scour several planets trying to find resources and complete objectives so that you can try and put the planet back together. Now, Dr. Mudo has a remote control essentially as his weapon, where he can stun enemies and also destroy them. Certain enemies may require being stunned before trying to destroy them, and makes facing enemies pretty engaging. He can also transform into other creatures to reach areas that are otherwise impossible for him to reach in his human form. The game definitely has that wild and wacky Midway flair to it, and incorporates a good amount of variety into the overall gameplay. His movement controls can feel a little wonky at times, but the camera definitely can cause some issues at times. There are a lot of aspects of the game to grasp in terms of collectibles and resources, but the game informs you of their importance as you come across them. Dr. Mudo himself is a quirky mad scientist, but a fun one to listen to as you play as well. This is one that I had a hard time actually putting down during my recording of this, and I actually look forward to spending more time to complete this game.
Much like my favorite superhero, I too can raise this world from the nasty, lethal, horrible mucky muck.
Next up is Hunter the Reckoning, published by Interplay and developed by High Voltage Software. This 4-player co-op hack-and-slash game based on a popular tabletop game has you fending off against hordes of the undead as something goes wrong in the town of Ashcroft. 4 characters are available to choose from: Deuce the Avenger, Samantha the Defender, Father Cortez the Judge, and Cassandra the Martyr. Each character has their own unique stats and weapons. Throughout levels, you will take down hordes of the undead as you save civilians and complete other various objectives. You can use melee weapons and various firearms, all with twin-stick shooting controls. The gunplay does feel pretty good here, while the melee could have used a little bit more impact to it. The combat can definitely get intense though, as there are moments where the game slams you with a ton of enemies. As you progress, your character will level up their abilities, which will come in handy the farther you get. Some of the bosses will also keep you on the edge of your seat as you try to keep some distance from them, especially this terrifying bear. This is a pretty solid hack and slash, and more so, one that you can play with your friends. Next up is Goblin Commander, published and developed by Jalico. This is actually one of the few RTS games available on the GameCube. While not my strongest genre of expertise, I have played a few RTS games, more notably the original Empire Earth on PC way back in the day. In this game, you control Grommel, a commander that can oversee the battlefield and command various units to locations to take out other monstrosities, as well as rival goblin units. This game does a great job of teaching you the ropes, and surprisingly never feels overbearing with its mechanics. You can create units for the battlefield, whether it be ones that can have melee or ranged attacks, as well as titans and turrets, just to name a few unit types. However, what I really liked was the aspect that you can highlight a unit and take direct control of them, allowing full movement with the analog stick and not just a cursor to give commands. This really adds immersion to the game. I will say, from the time I invested in this so far, I also appreciated that the missions were never overly long, at least not from what I saw at the time. While I am not big into the RTS scene, Goblin Commander is one that truly surprised me. I'm really looking forward to diving back into this one very soon. Next up is Blood Rain, published by Majesco and developed by Terminal Reality. Blood Rain is a third-person action-adventure in which players control Rain, a half-human, half-vampire assassin that takes place within the 1930s. Searching for her father, Rain works for the Bloodstone Society to stop evil threats from taking over the world. The game takes place across various areas in the world like the Bayou, Argentina, and Germany, facing off against abominations and Nazis. The gameplay itself is fast-paced and has a solid combat system that blends really well into the overall exploration. Rain has these two badass blades attached to her arms and can also dual-wield guns and mix everything into some cool-looking combat. Dish out enough damage and she can enter a blood rage mode where she can easily dismember enemies and deal heavy damage. And naturally, being half vampire, she can suck blood from enemies to replenish her health. Rain is definitely a very cool character that is a ton of fun to play as, and you can tell the gameplay took the front seat in this game's development. While it could have used a little bit more polish here and there, this was the start of a franchise and it was a strong effort for sure. Thankfully, this one just got remastered onto the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Switch, and I believe Xbox, so you can actually revisit this one nowadays on modern consoles. Next up is Gauntlet Dark Legacy, published and developed by Midway. Now, Gauntlet Dark Legacy may have appeared on this channel before under the Top 10 Worst Looking GameCube Games episode, but I also stated back then that regardless of its visuals and performance, the gameplay here is still a fun time. Selecting one of several class types, you embark on a massive quest to find shards protected by guardians across the lands and put an end to the demon Scorn, as you are the only hope left. Each class has unique attributes and abilities, and you will level them up throughout this hack and slash journey. The game is shockingly lengthy, but you can tackle it at least in 4-player co-op. The game does have glitches though, in particular selecting items with the D-pad that won't even highlight on your HUD. And that is pretty annoying, I'm not going to lie. However, get past that, and what's here is just fun, mindless entertainment. Goblins, ghosts, bugs, and death himself, what more could you ask for to better fit the Halloween season of gaming? Next up is Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee, published by Atari and developed by Pipeworks Interactive. Godzilla is a decades-old property and one that has such a massive fan base. Godzilla! In this arena brawler, you will take control of either Godzilla or various other monsters from the course of the films. Running around the city, beating each other up, and seeing buildings crumble in the process definitely feels like you're partaking in some of the epic battles that you can try to recreate from the films. Each monster has a unique set of moves, and the controls are how you would expect, having this weightiness to them. The creatures all look authentic to their original appearances, and I really like how they even have the Godzilla 2000s variant here, despite how bad that movie was. I actually saw that movie in theaters back in the day, and yeah, I mean, I have memories of seeing it, I just knew it wasn't a great film. Anyway, this is one that many have told me I needed to try, and what's here really is an enjoyable time. I can only imagine how much fun this is in 4-player multiplayer, and I may need to crack this one out for a game night sometime. That being said, if you're a Godzilla fan, what's here will definitely satisfy you. Last up is Rampage Total Destruction, published by Midway and developed by Pipeworks Interactive. Rampage was a much beloved arcade game back in the 80s, followed by a sequel later on in the 90s called Rampage World Tour that released in arcades, as well as the N64, PS1, and Saturn during that 5th generation. There were also a few more sequels that were released exclusively to home consoles afterwards. Anyway, Rampage Total Destruction is the final installment to date in which you choose a human-turned monster of your choice and wreak havoc within the multiple cities. Each level is about destroying every building in sight, as well as eating people and collecting objects from the windows. The military and police will try to stop you in the process, trying to throw everything they've got at you. Each city is broken up into levels, which are signified by a single city block. Destroy all the buildings, go to the next block, rinse, repeat, move on. You will be given special objectives to complete that will also give your character a new ability, which is a nice touch. It's a decent return for the series, but I will say the controls aren't that great honestly. Nothing really feels smooth when attacking buildings or people. There are a lot of unlockable characters, and you can even play the original Rampage and Rampage World Tour arcade games here. Sadly, I'd say you're better off just playing Rampage World Tour instead, as this game is just, it's okay, but feels like it could have had a better transition to the 3D space. Halloween time truly is the best time to play a certain set of games. While many immediately gravitate toward many of the more recognizable survival horror games, I thought it would be interesting to highlight some lesser discussed games that fit the bill. Now, of course, like I stated in the intro, other games that deserve a mention are Luigi's Mansion, Spawn Armageddon, Geist, Spirits and Spells, well, maybe not so much this infuriating mess, and Eternal Darkness. But I have in-depth reviews for all of these that I will leave links for in the description down below, but they all fit the bill to add to your Halloween-themed games. There are still quite a bit more games that fit this topic, and next year I plan to cover more in a follow-up episode. So, have you played any of these? Any that caught your interest? Sound off in the comments below, as I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel and love anything GameCube related. Additionally, there are GameCube Galaxy mugs and shirts available for purchase, so feel free to support the channel purchasing these. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will catch you all in the next episode.